This is Dr. Karen, and this is the Are They 18 Yet podcast, where I help parents raise independent, self-sufficient kids without sacrificing their own identity and sense of purpose. I'm here to share practical day-to-day solutions for raising kind, successful, well-adjusted human beings and actionable advice for supporting systemic changes so we can make this world a more inclusive, accepting place now and for future generations. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 62 of the Are They 18 Yet podcast. In this episode, I'm really excited to have Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner on as a guest. I have been wanting to have someone on the show who has a background in mental health as well as experience working with the criminal justice system. So I was really excited when Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner reached out to me. She has over 20 years experience working in the mental health system. She's also an expert on working with behavioral and emotionally disturbed children, adults, and families and offenders within the criminal justice system. And she is a doctor of counseling psychology and the owner of APT Counseling Services, LLC. And she's also a professor at Grand Canyon University in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences and Georgia Military College. In this conversation, we talk about red flags of anxiety and depression in kids, as well as the signs and symptoms of abuse and trauma that you'd want to look out for, whether you are a parent or whether you're a professional working with kids. We also talk a little bit about the school to prison pipeline, including what it is and how to take steps to prevent it, or really prevent kids from going down that path. And then we also have an interesting discussion about special education eligibility and IEPs and 504 plans when kids have a diagnosis like anxiety or some other mental health diagnosis, and just how you can work through putting educational accommodations in place for kids who have diagnoses like those. We also talk a lot about self-talk, how important it is, and the role it plays in developing kids' self-esteem. And then finally, we wrap up by talking a little bit about some of the current things that are going on in the world, how it's impacting kids' self-esteem, and also talk a little bit about how to encourage kids to take care of their mental health and do things that are good for them emotionally, even when they're resistant or they don't want to work on it. So I think you'll find this conversation really valuable if you are interested in supporting kids. Now, before all my interviews, I always like to mention resources that you can sign up for that I offer so that you can get on my mailing list and learn when episodes go live, and also so you can have a good resource at your fingertips. So in this interview, we talk a lot about emotional health, but if there are academic issues on top of anxiety, then that certainly is not going to help a child be well adjusted. And honestly, it can actually add to anxiety if kids are not feeling successful in the school setting. And one of the most common things that comes up is language processing and just being able to process language that is needed for things like comprehension, writing, reading. All of those things can cause a lot of stress if you're not quite sure how to put a sentence together so that you can understand the messages in the text that you're reading, as well as compose complete, coherent sentences when you're doing a writing assignment. So that's why I've created the ultimate guide to sentence structure. It was designed specifically for SLPs, but if you're not an SLP, you're certainly welcome to check it out. In this ultimate guide, I walk through the top 4 sentence types that tend to lead to comprehension breakdowns. When you address these sentence types directly, it can have a huge impact on comprehension. It can impact a student's ability to process what they're reading, as well as impact their writing performance. So if you want to grab that free guide, all you need to do is go to drkarenspeech.com/sentence structure. Again, that's drkarenspeech.com/sentence structure. So now, please enjoy this interview with Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner. So today I'm joined by Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I thought we could start off by just having you tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, and what you do.
Okay. My name is Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner. I'm a doctor of counseling psychology, a licensed psychotherapist, professor, and an author. I've been in private practice for over 20 years, and my practice focus working with families, children, and offenders within the criminal justice system.
Great. So yeah, that was when I saw that you had worked with the criminal justice system. That was something that I've really wanted to dive into. I know that that's a question that a lot of my listeners have about, how to work with kids. So I thought that was really interesting. I definitely wanted to get into that today. So when people typically come to see you in your practice, what are some common things that families and kids are struggling with?
Well, a lot of time, majority of the referrals will come from the school system. They're having problems in school, behavior problems. We're seeing a lot of anxiety, depression, and things like that. And so usually they will refer them to me. And from there is when I begin the process of working with the children and the parents.
So do you have a particular age range where kids are commonly referred, or is it kind of all over the board?
The youngest children I work with is 2 years old. And we just all over the board. Yeah.
Yeah. So what typical, like if kids are referred from the school, what usually prompts that?
Usually they're not getting along with other students in the class. Sometimes they have some inappropriate behavior of acting out, not listening or paying attention. And sometimes children have things like anxiety and stress. They don't do well on tests. They're not completing their assignments and things like that. So it's just depend. And sometimes there's some, I have kids that fight, maybe fighting in class, and things like that. So it's just a variety of different things that bring them into the office.
Yeah, I imagine. And, so one of the things and one of the questions that comes up a lot, because so again, a lot of the speech pathologists that I work with and, the teachers, parents, anybody who's listening here, a lot of times they are working with kids who are getting special ed services. And I know that sometimes some of those things that you mentioned are more common with kids who are getting services. And then one of the other concerns that's been brought up is the whole idea of the school to prison pipeline. And so I was curious how much you knew about that and if you could speak to what that actually means.
Well, I think what it means is that we're not really doing enough to educate the children to prepare them. So what happens is that we see a lot of them getting into the juvenile system. So I think it starts with education and being able to teach them the skills that they need to deal with the emotions and things that are going on in their lives.
Yeah.
But it's easier sometimes to get them in the criminal justice system than to keep them in school and to continue to educate them.
Yeah.
And that's why self-regulation of children's emotions are so important. Because that's where it starts in the early childhood ages. If we can teach them to better self-regulate, those coping skills, then that will transition as they go through the stages of development. And that's why we have a lot of adults who have stress and depression, because they didn't really, at a young age, we didn't learn how to properly deal with those emotions. So it starts there.
Right. Yeah. I imagine that would be huge. And I think that sometimes people just don't know how to respond and like how to support kids. It's great that they're referring them to you, but what mistakes do you see people making, whether it be professionals or parents? What mistakes do people make with regards to helping kids self-regulate and understand their emotions?
I think sometimes we don't listen as much as we should. I think we really have to, when a little person comes to you and they're talking to you and telling you how they feel, I think we do need to do more listening and understanding,
Mm-hmm.
And then, if they're going through some issues or they have a little concern, like Jim didn't want to play with me today, and you just like, well, it'll be okay.
Right.
But just listen and try to understand, and then try to help your child process that and work through that. Maybe Jim was having a bad day today. Mm-hmm. We don't always have good days. There's days when you don't feel like being part of it. Tomorrow will probably be a better day,
Mm-hmm.
And things like that.
Yeah. I think, understanding their own feelings and the perspectives of others, I know that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you're working with, I know it probably varies depending on what type of, how old the child is and their background. But if you were like, let's say that you got a referral for a kid who is elementary age and is showing some of those things that you mentioned, whether it be, some of the more minor things like not wanting to do their work versus more severe things like physical aggression, what's usually the type of intervention and the things that you would do to try to figure out what's going on with a younger child?
Mm-hmm. Well, whatever type of intervention I will utilize is going to depend on that child. So the first step is for me getting to know that child, because I like to incorporate a lot of reading and games. So really, in all my clients, whether it's children or adults, they dictate the intervention that I will utilize based on them. If it's a younger child, like I work with, an example, like someone with autism, I'm usually on the floor with them,
right?
And just trying to get them to just modeling and doing certain things with them and getting them to repeat certain things to me, and and things like that. I use a lot of activities. I even use my book, Rex's Journey.
Right, yeah.
Because it helps. We can talk about these emotions. We can actually see how he worked through his emotions and how he's feeling better. But I will say it just depends. All of my treatment plans are individualized to meet that person's need. I never know what I'm going to do. I just sit back, observe, and get to know that person. And then it just say, okay, let's go here. But yes.
So I wanted to ask you about how you would work with older kids, but you mentioned your book. So can you talk a little bit about what inspired that and tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I was inspired by what I experience every day in my daily practice. I mean, I've been on the journey with parents. I've seen their tears. I've seen their concern. And I know that it's impossible for me to see every child, but I can write a book and I can share the techniques that I use in my practice. And I know that it works. I'm a big advocate for children. Not all the children that I see are special education kids. Sometimes I have to work to try to get them the extra help and say, we need a 504. Contact that school and tell your teacher we need a 504. And I have been asked, okay, for an IEP, would you ask her to write up an IEP for this child? And I'm going to write it up exactly how I want it, things like that. So I'm a big advocate for them, but I think it's the concern. I've seen parents sometimes, they just don't know what to do. The school is telling them this. They don't, negative things about your kids, things that are going on. And I just try to help.
Yeah. I mean, the IEP process, like I was in it, and even the teachers, sometimes it's confusing for the people who are going through the process and having to implement it. So I can imagine that it's really difficult for parents to navigate all of that and to even know what to ask for. Like, I'm sure that a lot of them, and this is a question that comes up a lot, is, what's the difference between an IEP and a 504? And how do I ask for an evaluation? And is this something that should be done? Is that something that comes up a lot where parents are just like, what do I do?
Usually the parents don't know until I bring it up. I would say your child has an anxiety disorder. It's interfering with taking test time. The grades are failing. The pediatrician has already, and I get a lot of referrals from the pediatrician, so we'll work together too.
To try to,
so once they come over and the pediatrician said, we think he has anxiety, and I'll do my assessment, and yes, it's anxiety. So we can get a 504 plan to just make some modifications. Sometimes they have not heard of that, and so I have to educate them on the 504 and the difference between the IEP.
Yeah, for sure. Because I imagine that some kids, the accommodations might be enough. What typical, and I know it totally varies for kids, but what kind of accommodations have you seen be effective for kids with anxiety?
With children with anxiety, sometimes limited, let's say a class might have 20 questions on a spelling test. Mm-hmm. Let's just give them 10 to 15. And then you allow them more time. Mm-hmm. And then you allow them sometimes if they need to do some breathing techniques or walk outside the classroom to get themselves together, you allow that.
Yeah.
So obviously knows on IEPs and 504s for children who may have anxiety disorder.
See, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that I've seen the shortened assignments a lot when it's, the people want kids to be accountable. And I think that's really important. But at the same time, the whole point of the assignment is, can you show me that you can do the skill? And right. If you've done enough, does it really matter if you've done an extra 5? So, yeah, I mean, I know that sometimes I've gotten that concern from people, and I get that because, they think, oh, it's not fair. And well, I think what has been said is, what is it? Fair is where there's balloons and cotton candy. Life isn't always fair. So obviously everybody needs something different. So and the extended time and separate settings I've seen utilized as well. I'm wondering, do they ever do preferential seating where they can sit up close to the teacher and so they can ask questions? Is that something that helps as well?
It does, especially with children with ADHD to help them stay on focus. Now, I see that mostly used with children with ADHD. The teacher will place them in the front so that she can have access to them. So when she sees them going off track, she'll like, hello, Johnny.
Yeah, gently, just kind of give a little reminder. Yeah, that's a common one I've seen as well. So I wanted to, because you mentioned that you have a background working with kids who, and I'm not sure if this is the educational label that they have, and there's the emotional disturbance label, which is one of the eligibility categories for, that where kids can be identified and get services in the school system, whether it be they're getting accommodations through a 504 or whether they're getting services through an IEP. And I don't know if this is true, but some of the social workers that I've worked with have said that it's really, really hard to evaluate and qualify and find the data needed to qualify a student under that particular label. And I'm wondering if that is something that is specific to my area, or if that's something that's true globally, where that's kind of hard, a very hard area for them to figure out how to qualify a student for services in the schools.
Are you talking about the social emotional area?
Yeah, that is just like academic, it's cut and dry. They should be reading here, they're not. But then finding the data to have the criteria to say this child qualifies under this area, have you found that it's kind of hard to get services in that area?
Well, it is under that. Yeah, it is under that area. But that's why I think that if you have a child who has social emotional, you can really find other diagnoses under that areas that will help, because most kids who will have that will also demonstrate some anxiousness, frustration, and anger. And those are things that we see in anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the reason why they're having that, because they can't self-regulate. Yeah. So there's just ways to get around that, where that doesn't have to be the main diagnosis.
Yeah.
You can bring in other.
And I imagine, like you said, ADHD, there could be, I've seen kids qualify under the area of other health impairment, where it's like, I just know when I was on the IEP team, we're like, we've got to get this child help somehow. We want it to be officially in writing. So, and then emotion, ED was kind of hard. So we would go with OHI. So they would get something.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, everybody's like, I don't care what the paper says. I just want the child to get to
want to get them some services. Yes. Yes. But I, like I said, because you have so many, when you start looking at the DSM-5 and the different types of diagnosis, there are so many diagnoses that kind of overlap, each other.
Right.
Things like that. Yes.
It certainly helps when there's a diagnosis from outside, though, with having the information you need to be able to check off all the boxes and do what that the child needs.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's very important, especially when you're working with children.
Yeah, for sure. What about, so we talked a little bit about younger kids, and you mentioned that you do a lot of things to build rapport and engage. What's it like when you have a referral for a student who is older, maybe junior high and high school, and they're a new referral and they haven't really had services and they're presenting with some challenges? How is it different for an older child?
Well, what we do know that adolescence is one of the most difficult groups to work with.
Yes, I have.
And so there are a lot of I'm in Columbus, Georgia, and so there are a lot of my colleagues that don't work with adolescents, and they send them to me because they are. It takes a lot of rapport building with them and things like that, and especially if they don't want services, and their parents are making them come to services, but basically just teaching them different, depending on what's going on. I will tell you, I'm seeing a lot of more depression in that age group, self-harming behavior, and stress and anxiety and things like that. So it's just teaching them different types of techniques as far as, how do you deal with the depression, and trying to find out the source of the depression and then helping them work through that, and I give them stress management tips, things to do to better help them cope with their anxiety and things like that. So it can be very interesting when you're working with that middle school up to 18 in groups sometimes. But then sometimes when you have some kids that ask their parents, I need to go see and talk to someone. And those are the ones that are more open to it and, do great with it too.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine if you're asking for it, then
you get it.
Already on board. That's part of your job is done. And ready to go. So I'm curious about, obviously, the last couple of years, there's probably more of the depression and anxiety with all kids, but that age group as well, because things went online and people had more screen time. It seems like there's sometimes the solution can be counterintuitive, where it's like, are they stressed out because they're too busy, or are they stressed and depressed because they're not fulfilled because they're not doing things that they enjoy? How do you tease out what's going on there when that's the case?
I think through exploration and that's finding out what's going on with them. I think the pandemic has been very difficult on children, adolescents, you know, because they couldn't do a lot of things. Sometimes school went online, and some of them, especially the children who had ADHD and anxiety, they had a lot of difficulties trying to adjust to the new format. Right. So for me, it's just talking to them in exploration of their feelings and their thoughts, you know, and then working from that.
Mm-hmm. What do you do when you are exploring things with a child and you realize that there's probably something that they could be doing that would help them feel better, but they're just not open to it yet, but you're pretty sure that that's something that they need to do, whether it be like, you know, again, one thing that I think of a lot is that kids are doing a lot of their relationships online rather than in person. And they're getting a little bit more restricted in their interests. And it's kind of like this immediate dopamine hit of, you know, checking my Instagram and seeing who liked my images. And that feels enticing, but it's probably not what's going to help them feel good. They probably need to get out and do some real life activities. But I know that sometimes it can be hard to get out of your comfort zone. So how do you work through that with a child who doesn't quite realize why they're depressed or what they would need to do in order to feel better?
You know, and we do talk a lot about this in some of my sessions with some of the older kids, because socialization in person is very important to build your social skills. You know, and so I just try to encourage them to like activities, go to games, go hang out with your friends, you know, go to the mall, you know, because that will help you. I always try to find out before all of this happened, what did you enjoy doing? What was, you know, what made you happy? And they would usually tell me. So maybe you can't hang out with 10 or 15 of your friends like you used to, but you can talk to your mom and see if she would allow a couple of your friends to come over and things like that. So I just always try to encourage, you know, them to just get out, because they do need to get out. They do need to leave the phone alone, you know, the computer. We need, you know, we have a whole generation who communication skills have gone down.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And their socialization skills. I've had students that would come into my office and won't even look at you, just hold their head down. You know, so I think that we you know, we have to encourage that, and because we need socialization, we need communication in person also.
Yeah, you know, I found, like I said, I have a middle schooler at home, and there's sometimes some resistance to things, and then it's like, oh, she realizes she likes it. You know, there's always that, I don't really feel like putting my phone down, but then, you know, and then there's just this happy person underneath that wasn't quite there before.
Yeah,
I noticed it in myself too, where I'm like, I need to get out more.
Yeah. You need to take a break. And then once I do that sometimes too, and I say, wow, I feel so much better. Thank you for taking me horseback riding this weekend. My husband took me on horseback riding. We got out and rode horses with a group, you know, and things like that. But yeah, sometimes you just need to get out and meet other people and just, you know, socialize, because we have to work on our socialization skills and communication skills.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how when you look at how long the pandemic was, where it's like my stepdaughter was at the end of 5th grade when this started, and then she was a 7th grader when it was sort of normal again. Like that's just, and I can't imagine your first year freshman year of high school being online, or your first year of kindergarten being online. My nephew was in kindergarten and he was just heartbroken. He was like, what? I can't go to school anymore, you know?
Yeah. And I think sometimes, you know, dealing with the pandemic, I think it was difficult on us as adults and parents. And sometimes I don't think we realize how, you know, confusing it was to the children also.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes they didn't always realize why. You don't always realize you're feeling all these things and you don't know how to process them or understand them. What do you do when you can tell that the child doesn't quite have the language to express how they're feeling? How do you help them to process that and kind of tease it out?
Drawing. They like to draw. And so they can always draw, even if they can just draw stick people in their house and their family and things like that. And so I can explore it through the drawing of what they're trying to say and what they're thinking and what they're feeling.
Is that something that older kids find interesting as well? Is this something you kind of use across the age ranges?
It's going to depend, mostly at elementary schools. With older kids, they'll talk to you.
Yeah.
If they like you. And if they get to like you, they will share and open up. But they like playing games and things. Like, there's so many games out there. If you have someone that's having anger issues, they have bingo games. Someone having anxiety, so I have different games in my office. We're engaging these games. And of course, if they win, they get a prize and things like that. And things like that. And I also give them like different worksheets. If we have self-esteem issues, this is what I want you to work on. And then when you come in next time, we'll go over it and talk about it.
Yeah, I imagine the game would kind of just break the ice a little bit or take the pressure off of why you're there, instead of just there's this huge elephant in the room and it's scary and awkward, and relieve the tension a little bit.
Yeah, but most time, like I said, if they like you, they open up. And once they feel comfortable with you and you're able to, to develop a relationship with them, you can't shut them up. They're happy. They're smiling.
Yeah. That is so
you have
interesting.
To work a little harder. You have to work to win them over.
For sure. That's kind of interesting when the floodgates open, when it's like, you have, I remember I had a student he was very quiet and introverted, and his teacher was like, oh yeah, he never talks in class. I can't get a gauge on him. And we started talking about, he was into running. He was like into track, and I'm also into running. And we started talking about it, and he's just like talking my ear off. It's interesting how that happens, where it's like, oh, there it is. There's my entry point.
There definitely, I think when you're working with older kids, there definitely has to be a connection. And once they feel that connection, they open up, so.
Have you found that our kids still, again, with the online stuff, I think that the interests of kids have changed. There used to be, again, more in-person things. Part of that was just what was going on in the world, but how have kids' interests shifted over the last 10 to 15 years and what you're seeing?
I think that they just want to, I think they're more into the social media.
Yeah.
The TikTok and posting things, and I think that they're always like, they're into their friends, because that's how they communicate with their friends, and things like that. But I think this definitely the social media.
Yeah.
Is, what is it? I don't know, the Snapchat, the live, all of that. But, that's them,
How do you help families set boundaries around that, seeing as how that is how kids interact? You don't want to, not let them interact the way that kids are talking to each other these days, but at the same time have healthy boundaries around screen time.
I think that we should just set up some structure and some rules. Just like dinner time, we're all going to eat together. So could you please just put your phone away during dinner? Sometimes family members may have movie night or family time, and just ask them could you please put your phone up during the movie and then afterwards, and things like that. I think just being able to have some structure and just set some boundaries and some limits, so that we know that, so they automatically know that at 6 o'clock is dinner time, so I can't be on the phone. But you best believe as soon as dinner's over, get into and things like that. But you appreciate that, and I think it's important to tell children how much we appreciate them, and thank you. Thank you for not using the phone at dinner. That's great. Thank you so much. Just let them know, because by nature children just want to please us. And the more we praise, they try to do better, because they want us to be happy and they want us to think good of them. And that's what I noticed. And I always tell parents, the small amount of improvement you see in your child behavior, I want you to tell them, I am so great. I'm just so happy that today you stayed on green all day. Green light. So that child, probably stay on green all week.
I think that sometimes there's little things that parents don't realize, or just teachers, or anybody working with kids, where there's little bits of progress that are progress for them that don't seem like a big deal for you, like even just being able to put the phone down and not having it be a big deal, being like, oh, that was great that you remembered, and it made me feel so nice to know that you were paying attention, to giving me your undivided attention, or something like that. And little things that we just are like, I've heard people say, well, why should I praise them for something they should just be doing? Well, they're not developmentally where you are yet, so it's a big deal for them.
It's a big deal, yes. And I think that sometimes that children do need praise. They need it, and I think it helps build self-confidence. It helps build their self-esteem. It makes them feel good about themselves, and that's what we want for all the children.
Especially if they're a child who has been getting in trouble and they've been getting all these punishments. It's like those kids need it more than anybody.
Yeah. So I think it just, I do think that it just depends on the individual, but I have never met a child who did not enjoy being praised.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever met an adult that doesn't enjoy being praised either?
Yeah, we like it. We like to feel that way also,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes people say, like, the way that we talk to our kids, it's just, I think sometimes people don't realize that it's always, if you're just like, do this, do this, do this, and then you don't give them any feedback about when they're doing something well, and it's always telling them what not to do, then it's kind of hard to just be on the other end of that and never getting any kind of praise or positive feedback. I think that can be pretty hard.
And I think that it needs to be a combination of things. Because if you're always telling them to do this and to do that, just I think what we have to remember, that the family system is the first teachers of children. And so that being said, it aids in the development of personality, relationship building, self-esteem, and so many more. And a lot of things that children learn within the family system is what they're going to carry with them as they start to go through the stages of development.
Yeah.
And so we do know that if we look at the different types of parenting styles that we have, depending on our parenting style, it has a lot to do with how that child personality will develop, how that child will be able to do problem solving in the future, building self-esteem. Yes.
So what kinds of things have you seen that are helpful as far as parenting style, and what kinds of things have you seen that are less helpful?
Well, what I do think is help. I think that what's something that's very healthy. I think that we have to foster independence, so it's good to give children choices, but at the same time, with the choices, you don't want to go overboard with choices for kids. But I think that that's important, because you want to, build, self-esteem. and things like that, and give them choices, make more independent, but try to limit it. I've seen parents say, well, what do you want? You want hamburger tonight, French fries, pizza, chicken tenders.
Yeah.
And the kids like, they can't make up their mind, so just limit it to two,
Right.
Oh, yeah. And that's building at the same time, showing them that you're able to make choices independent, that what you say, people do listen and value your opinion and things like that. I think sometimes criticizing, I see a lot, a lot of kids get criticized a lot by their parents, and it does not work well for their self-esteem and self-confidence when they start to engage with peers and things like that. So I do think we have to be careful with what we say to our children, not only what we say, but how we say things. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not what we say, it's how the approach that we use.
Yeah. I mean, imagine with the choices and those types of things, it can be overwhelming if you try to throw too much out at once, mm-hmm. or if you criticize in a way that is not focusing on what they did, but who they are, where it's like, mm-hmm. it's kind of a fixed mindset thing versus, mm-hmm. oh, you just made a mistake, mm-hmm. kind of a thing.
Because what I found, sometimes people can say things so much that they actually begin to believe that, mm-hmm. that I'm not smart and that I'm a bad kid, But I always tell them, there's no bad children, because if it was bad, it's something we couldn't get rid of it and you couldn't change it. Mm-hmm. It would be so embedded within you. So it's not. So we have the ability to change it. So we're just going to work on it. Mm-hmm. You're not a bad kid.
Have you ever worked with kids who just that idea was just, and belief was just so ingrained? How do you start to reverse that if they've just had this negative self-image for a really long time?
Through positive self-talk. Self-talk is very important.
Yeah.
So positive self-talk, but not just talking it, but see, self-talk doesn't do any good if you don't believe it. You have to believe it and you have to know it. And that's when you get the parents involved, telling your kids how great you are, how we love you, how beautiful you are. You have such a gentle heart and spirit, and things like that. So, and just trying to, and like I said, I have exercises that they can do that will work on that, whether it's worksheets, and things like that. The most important things is that we all have unique qualities about ourselves. Tell me, and that's where you start with, tell me some qualities that make you so unique, some things about you that you're just proud of. And then what I try to do is build off of that. Mm-hmm. And so when you start to feel like, you're not smart enough or you're not good enough, I want you to think about those qualities, those things that you just said. But not only do I want you to say it, I need you to believe it. Mm-hmm. I need you to own it.
Yeah, I was listening to, it was another therapist who was talking about working with adults, and where like some of these, I don't know, guru people are like, you have to just say that, like they want you to say something to yourself and use this self-talk that's so far off from where your current belief is that your brain automatically is like, no, I don't believe that. And what she was saying is that you just have to start with something small that they can believe. And then it's like, okay, like inching closer to, further and further closer to where we want to be, instead of just pushing somebody and, like, if they haven't done well in school, saying I'm a straight A student, well, that doesn't make sense, but maybe they can talk about one specific thing that they did well, and they can latch onto that and pull that in as, evidence that I'm learning.
I think it's, just important to say, what's so unique about you? What do you think about? And they'll just tell you. I'm like, that's good. Well, I play the piano, really, and you just explore that, not everyone can do that. So yeah, so I just try to take what they're good at and just try to explore that and let that help that to build, their self-esteem or whatever they're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to ask, and I know that, as you've said, you work with youth in the justice system, and you work with trauma. And I know that sometimes it can be hard for parents or for professionals to know, like, is this just a behavior that's kind of a mild thing, or has there been some severe trauma or abuse that happened that we don't know about? So what are some of the indicators that something really significant has happened that people should look out for?
Sometimes with them, just changes in the behavior. If you have someone that's very outgoing and you notice that they want more of a loner now, don't want to be around family or friends and things like that. And if you notice maybe some bruises or things that are there that haven't been there. I think the most important thing is just to make sure you pay attention to your child. Pay attention. Because usually when there's whether negative or positive, sometimes there's just some change in their behavior or something that they may need to talk about, or you may need to explore with them. But it just all depends. And when we talk about the sexual abuse or physical abuse, I think we have to pay attention, because I've seen this so many times where maybe a little girl would say, "Mom, I'm hurting in my private area." And I think, things like that, or boys, those are things that you need to take them to the pediatrician to get checked out, and just be aware of, who your children, are around, and where they are, and things like that. We just have to, therapists, we just have to do a complete biopsychosocial assessment, to get that background and to assess the trauma that's going on. And then actually from there, depending on what's going on, that's how we decide to develop that treatment plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think those things, it's, as somebody who, when you see something like a bruise or something like that, it's like, whew. I mean, I know that as a person in the school system, that is just, it's scary. You don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. And with the and like you say, the emotional abuse, that you can't see it like if you can see a bruise on someone,
right? Yeah.
Because I even think here in Columbus, if you can call the Department of Family Children if you feel like a child's been emotional abused by a parent or someone, they would, and things like that. But that's when definitely will play out with kids thinking, with bullying by other kids, and kids just thinking they're not good enough and nobody likes them, and things like that. So we just have to pay attention, because I do believe that children just don't act out without a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether there's a chemical imbalance within the brain, because some of the disorders, it's a chemical imbalance somewhere, something going on there. I just don't. In all my years, there's a reason. And I think we should listen and talk to them and try to find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, I know you've got some good resources. You have a book and you have some other things on your website. Where can people find out about you and what you do and some of the resources you offer?
You can go to my website. I have my books. My first children book is Rex's Journey, helping children understand and cope with the emotion. And it's about this young 5-year-old who experienced happiness and sadness and didn't understand why. And the book just takes us on this journey, and it teaches children healthy coping skills to help them understand and deal with their emotions. I have another book, ADHD Warrior, helping children conquer ADHD unwanted behavior, but it's coming out. It'll be out in August of this year.
Okay.
But I also have my first book, which is for adults. It's Childhood Sexual Abuse, Pathway to Mental Health Issues and Delinquent Behavior. So my books are available on my website, Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner -.com. And I also have resources, different types of resources. If you just go look under the resource link on ADHD, anxiety, whatever you need.
Okay.
So they can just go to my website, and there's a lot of helpful information there to help parents and children.
Well, I will link to all these in the show notes.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you to check out the show notes and check out Dr. Ambroes Pass-Turner's website. She has a ton of great resources on there, and you can get information about any of her books that she mentioned. Again, that's drambrosepassturner.com. I'll have the direct link in the show notes. And then also don't forget to check out the Ultimate Guide to Sentence Structure. That's going to give you some key information about how to build the language processing skills that kids need in order to be successful with different academic tests like reading and writing. There are certain sentence types that make a huge impact on comprehension, and I outline what those are and how to address them in this free guide. So all you need to do to check that out is go to drkarenspeech.com/sentence structure. Again, that's drkarenspeech.com/sentence structure. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.